Hi friends, welcome to my sewing room. Today I'm going to walk through some of the steps on making the masks for first responders, hospitals, doctors' offices, whoever might make use of these masks in the coming weeks. So I know we're all eager to get started, and some of the instructions out there are a little bit vague. So I'm going to walk through two separate videos. One is for if you have a serger and you're going to be using the serger as well as your sewing machine, and then there's a separate set of instructions for just using the sewing machine. So I will try to go through and explain everything as best I can and show you in video, and also I'm going to assume that you have most of the basic tools at home. If you don't have it, then improvise and you can figure it out. So let's get started. First of all, some of you may have only received a template that has this smaller version, and it tells you to add an inch onto the straight end. Well, I've made a template that I can put on cardstock that has the larger for the front of the mask and the smaller for the inside of the mask. So this mask is 2-layered, and this extension that you see over on the right is what's going to allow us to put a pocket on the inside of the mask so folks can insert a filter, and this pretty much just extends the life of whatever filter they're using, and they can use this mask that we're making as an outside covering that they can wash, and it extends the life of whatever they're using on the inside. So I'm going to assume that you've cut out both of your templates to lay on your fabric. So for the larger of the template, you're going to want, for both, you're going to want 100% cotton fabric, but you want your thicker, more durable fabrics on the outside, and probably the more decorative colors and patterns. Use that for the outside. And if you have some plain, not so interesting fabrics, use those for the inside, for the smaller cuts. So I've already cut a stack of fabric, but I always want to make the point that you save yourself a lot of time if you stack your fabric with right sides together like this. So now you can take, and I've got several layers here, but you can take 2 of these, and this is ready to make one mask, and we're going to start our sewing on this large outside curve. So you've saved yourself a step on having to match things up by cutting these with the right sides together. So now I have just cut 3 layers, 3 masks worth in one cutting, and I've got my right sides together, so it's ready to go. Using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, if we're going to stitch this, we're going to sew right around that outer edge. And now I'm doing the same for what's going to be the inside of that same mask. The inside pocket, which you'll see is quite a bit smaller. Now we're going to open the inside portion of our mask and turn it over. And you're going to go over to the ironing board and fold a really small, maybe 1/4 inch each. You're going to do 2 folds on each side, press that, and come back to the sewing machine to sew those flat, because that's going to create our nice finished edge on the inside of the mask. So I've pressed these edges over toward the wrong side. Now I'm just going to straight stitch down the center of those to give them a finished look. Similar to quilting, we're going to want to press these hems, so if we press them both in the same direction, so pick a direction, right or left, it doesn't matter, but if we press them both the same way, then when we turn them to face each other, they'll marry up and interlock nicely along the seam. Also, if you're sewing, you'll want to clip a few times. Be careful not to cut what you've just stitched. But just make some little clips along the edge so that this will curve nicely. You do that on both the front and the back. Now match up your center seam, and you can see if you've pressed them correctly, they marry up nicely. And then we're going to just stitch along the edge to join the front to the back, using that 1/4 inch seam allowance again. You can pin it if you need to pin it. My fabric's pretty sturdy and sticks together nicely, so I don't feel like I need to pin this. I just check it before I go too far to make sure I don't go astray. Forgot to back stitch on my leading edge, so I'll give it a couple more stitches. Going backwards here. And all that will turn onto the inside, so you don't have to lose your mind about too much excess thread cutting. But once you've done the back, now marry up the seam at the bottom just like you did at the top. And really these are pretty forgiving, so don't lose your mind about making it too perfect. So we do a little back stitch. We don't have to worry about trimming that middle one. We can trim the end ones in case they show. Bumping the tripod, sorry about that. Hope I don't make you sick. So now we turn it right side out. And you will see that we have got a nice curve. Our mask makes a nice curve. It's going to accommodate a filter on the inside. So now let's press it to make it a little easier to work on the next step. So go ahead and press everything flat except right here. You're going to, instead of turning these to match your 1/4 inch seam, you're going to turn them on the diagonal similar to what you see on your pattern. And if you notice on the pattern, we have this little diagonal. That's just to remind us that we're going to turn those in on that diagonal, and that's going to help us when we turn it to make the elastic hole. So we'll press these on both sides when we do our pressing, and we'll come back to the sewing machine and I'll show you the next bit. Now I've pressed my diagonals here, and I've also pressed a 1/4 inch fold so that I can do 2 straight stitches here, or a straight stitch on either side, I should say. And then we're going to fold it over to make the channel for the elastic. Take it off in reverse. And I do love that my sewing machine does the cutting off for me. It saves a lot of time and effort for me. So now that I've cut those off, I'm going to fold this so that, I should trim these. If you look at the serger instructions, you'll see why I like the serger, because it makes it a lot tidier and a whole lot faster to do this with the serger as well. But it can be done without one, so don't fret. Okay, I can't get that. Clean it up later. So we're going to fold this over. And to make my elastic channel, I'm going to sew right on top of that. I'm going to tuck this right under my pocket, but I'm going to fold the pocket back a little bit so I can stitch right along that line. So that'll end up being hidden. Right along our prior stitch line. So you see now we have a channel here for our elastic that goes all the way through, but it's covered. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to tuck that just a little bit under, and then I'm going to pull it back so I can sew right down that line. Oh, we should go forward. Let's go forward. I'm going to trim all my little Irish pennants, and I can say that because I'm Irish. So now we have the basic product. So what we're going to add now is a channel along the top for our wire, if we're going to add a wire to it. So you begin this, and the measurement is not real scientific. I put my foot right along the edge where my seam is. So that'll give you enough room to slide a wire onto the inside. We're not launching the space shuttle here. We're just trying to make a channel to be able to put the wire in. So keep your foot just a little bit away from the edge and keeping your needle in the center. And just trace the edge of the top of the mask. And this is going to create a channel to insert the wire that you can fit and mold to the shape of your face. Now, you may or may not have wire to insert. If you don't have it, don't worry about it. Just leave that as it is. If you don't have elastic, don't worry about it. Leave it as it is. But if you have 3/8 inch elastic, cut yourself a 22 inch length of 3/8 inch elastic, and using your fancy safety pin threading device or any other fancy threading device you choose, we're going to make a complete loop. So make sure you keep it flat. Go down through the other side. Take our safety pin off. Now we're going to use a zigzag stitch to zigzag those ends together. Cut off the tails, and now I'm going to pull that seam on the elastic into one of the channels so we don't have to look at it. So that part's finished, and these will go around the back of your head. And I'll insert some wire, show you what I've used for the wire. I still have some. Don't have any more pre-cut, but I have used this coated gardening wire, and I'm cutting about a 6-inch length, and using a little tool, using a little tiny pair of pliers to curl the ends so that we don't have any sharp ends going into the mask. So imagine if I had a longer piece, I would have about a 6-inch piece of this. You then insert that wire into the mask, and if you don't have any wire, that's fine. Just leave the channel open and someone can add something to it later. But you would put the wire in and fit it just a little bit so that it curves, and then if you had your longer wire, I just do a little stitch, little vertical stitch right over here, and another little vertical stitch right over here, so that the wire can't come out of the channel when it goes into the wash. And that is finished. I don't have any more pre-cut, but I have used this coated gardening wire, and I'm cutting about a 6-inch length, and using a little tool, using a little tiny pair of pliers to curl the ends so that we don't have any sharp ends going into the mask. So imagine if I had a longer piece, I would have about a 6-inch piece of this. You then insert that wire into the mask, and if you don't have any wire, that's fine. Just leave the channel open and someone can add something to it later. But you would put the wire in and fit it just a little bit so that it curves, and then if you had your longer wire, I just do a little stitch, little vertical stitch right over here, and another little vertical stitch right over here so that the wire can't come out of the channel when it goes into the wash. And that is finished.